Ink has famously got a bad rap as tracers or finishers, and while elements of those are kind of true, it's not telling you the whole story. In a similar way to calling letterers just the people that paste balloons on a page, you're actually missing a large component of the work, and specifically the work in aiding the storytelling and style that the inkers are bringing to a page. I want to take a look at a well-known inker this week, Scott Williams. Scott has inked like a ton of stuff, but has been working with Jim Lee for quite a considerable amount of time, and they worked together again on this book, Superman Unchained, alongside Sal Cipriano, Alex Sinclair, and Scott Snyder. And by looking at these pencils, which were published as part of DC's Director's Cut edition of issue 1, and the final finished pages, which I've dropped the colour out of, we'll take a look at what Scott Williams is really doing on the page and how it kind of affects the way we read it. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So the first thing to get out of the way when it comes to inking is that, yes, technically there is a lot of tracing involved. You need only look at a finished page and a penciled page and you can see what the penciler is putting onto the page is, clearly visible in the final inks. But that's a base to start from and it doesn't begin and end with that. So I want to use 3 examples to show you some functions of the inks. And there are more than this operating, but this I feel is kind of a good primer. The first comes on page 1. So Scott Williams has a particularly tough job with Jim Lee, because Lee does 2 things which can trouble an inker. He's rough with his pencils, and he likes to draw a lot of lines, like, quite a lot of lines. Scott is a good inker though, and where you can see on this panel of the kid's face, his lines are kind of sketchy. And that's a major decision for Scott too, because he has to decide if he's going to clean up Lee's lines and make them perfect. For example, here's a page from a recent Superman book, inked by Mick Gray. Mick makes the lines clean and very smooth. I mean, we don't have the pencils to look at to see how rough they were, but it's another style of inking. It's a very clean and polished style. Here though, Scott channels Lee's roughness into the inks. And you'll see this throughout their pairing together. Rather than clean up that sketchy line on the kid's right cheek, Scott doubled down on it. He creates that second line, and on the chin, he does it again. And even on the bottom lip, he almost scrawls it in. We're taught inkers are there for neatening up work, but what Williams does is heighten what Lee brings to the work, not arbitrarily try to clean it up. It's a beautiful decision that adds so much to the style and feel people get when they think of Jim Lee. Same on the hand, I mean Lee has almost just kind of roughed it in, and Williams comes in and finishes it up. But he adds one of those doubled lines again, like on the shaft of the pencil here at the top, and in the shadow underneath the finger. It all creates this element of it still feeling kind of sketchy and rough, but clearly you can see that that's a calculated style from Williams. And if we look just a panel above, the kid is on the floor now. Lee's put these lines in suggesting a wood panelled floor, but Williams has cleaned it up. He's made it more obvious, built the lines more specifically, and then started to add shading Lee omitted against the table, even roughing up the tabletop surface to keep what was otherwise a flat top in a page of Lee's work to something more akin to the rest of the texture in the book. And that's a really nice way of thinking about what inkers, and in particular Williams, do with pencils. It's an endless series of decisions on how to render something on a page for legibility, style, and conformity. But there's a bit more though, because inkers have a range of tools they can use to create these black lines, and with that range of widths, nib types, brush sizes and more. There's a page a little further in where Lee draws Superman huge right across the page, but it's filled with all these tiny little specks of ripped carnage and lines. In the pencils, while not confusing, it's not the most clear of panels. The lines all blend into one another, and things such as Superman's hand can just kind of get lost in that grey craziness. It's an inherent problem with pencils for most comic artists, they aren't worrying about switching tools too much. Their pencil gives a single line width and they draw. It's down to the inkers to translate that into something that makes more sense and has more clarity on the page. And if we zoom into Superman's arm and hand, again, we're keeping that classic Lee roughness on the inks, though it's probably worth changing that to the classic Lee and Williams roughness, but he's now adding in various line widths to help readability. You can see the thickness near the shoulder, not present in Lee's pencils, which rolls down to the inner forearm and thicker again around the hand and knuckles. It seems that in crowded areas, Williams wants to embolden some of Superman, so he's clearer to dissect from the background, as all these pieces of shrapnel, and indeed the 2 astronauts, are all pretty much the same line width. And let's only slightly touch on all the nitty-gritty detail that Williams has added to emphasise that shrapnel. He's put tons of lines into that one panel to make a lot of that shrapnel thick and 3-dimensional, where Lee had kind of left it flat and more 2D. And the line thickness is apparent again here on this page, where once again, without inks, the panel can be kind of confusing, and even when darkened to simulate black lines, becomes kind of muddy. Williams adds the thickness across the shin, across the forearm, and even up into the boot to help clarify what we need to be looking at. It's subtle, it's small, but you can see the difference. And the final thing I wanted to show was how Williams adds to the art more directly, or changes it up. This is a panel of Superman with one of the astronauts. In Lee's pencils, he stares straight ahead, not quite at Superman, and it gives him this sort of shell-shock look. It's a fine panel, it works. But by the finished inked page, Williams appears to have slightly altered the expression by adjusting the lines on the eyes and the placement of the highlights on the pupils. It's a small change, sure, taken in isolation, but it dramatically affects the way the panel reads. Suddenly, it's a thankful look up of admiration. It adds heroism to the detail that wasn't as apparent in Lee's originals. Inking is clarity. It's taking the original pencils of the artist, understanding what the effect is that that's trying to convey, the emotion, the focus, and it's making it clear. Emphasizing what needs to be emphasized, adjusting what needs to be adjusted, and fixing what needs fixing. A lot of artists who use separate inkers, those artists whose style you love, it's actually down to the inkers to convey that, or add to it. Again, Lee's rough style, that's Williams channeling that through the inks, because it's not the only way to ink those pencils, but now Williams has created a look to that page that is synonymous with the Jim Lee style. In the same way as letterers, similar to colorists, inkers are an unseen and underappreciated part of the process of creating comic books. Underappreciated by readers, because pencilers know exactly what sort of magic a good inker can bring to their work. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Panel Naked, please consider supporting us on our Patreon page, where you can get access to reading lists, over 100 annotated comic book pages, and loads of extra articles and analysis every month. Also, we've got the new comic book club that we've just started. You can also find me on Twitter at HassanAwi for more comics talk, and finally hit subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest Strip Panel Naked episodes, and we will see you next time.